Hello, class. Cam Mattis again, your instructor for History 1301 at Austin Community College. One of the things you hear me talk about in other videos or emails, I talk a little bit about getting oriented in time and space. And what I mean by that is being on top of things in terms of geography. And I suggested to you that you use Google Earth for that, or you can just use a traditional globe if you happen to have one sitting around the house. The globe is maybe a little bit easier to maneuver, whereas Google Earth has the advantage of you can zoom down in with a little bit more focus on a particular location. But I also want you to be oriented in time. And I think timelines in some ways are a good way, at least as kind of an abstract diagram, is a good starting point, at least as a way to get a handle on time or get some perspective. So what I do with chapter 1 in History 1301 is I go way, way back to the beginning of people, say 250, 300,000 years ago or so. And then we talk a little bit about that migration out of Africa over into other parts of the world, including the Western Hemisphere or the Americas. And that goes back a long time too, not nearly as far back, but maybe let's say as a maximum of say 20,000 years before the present, which would be 18,000 BCE or 18,000 BC or so. And then there's quite a bit of time goes by again here before other people come to the Americas, like Europeans. Who these first Europeans were, we know pretty definitively that it was the Vikings around 1000 CE. And that was really up in the northeastern part of Canada, Newfoundland, and that area. They did not have a huge impact on American society or anything like that, as did the Spanish, who were the first to actually colonize in the Americas. They colonized in the Caribbean starting at the end of the 15th century. So if you look at this little spot over here, this little gap between the red and the black there, that's what you're looking at here with this gray timeline, with the Spanish coming to the Caribbean sometime around, say, 1492, and then the beginning of the United States in the 1770s. So one of the things I want to do then is clarify a little bit about the overall timelines for History 1301 and 1302, which is quite a bit different. The legislature dictates that we start History 1301 as far back as 1492. And you can see right off the bat that History 1302 covers a much smaller time frame, even though it can get very dense and very important events. But basically, the legislature divided the US 1 and US 2 at 1877, which is the end of Reconstruction at the end of the American Civil War. Now, for you, keeping track of time and keeping track of a timeline is definitely probably more important for Unit 1 and the very beginning of Unit 2 than it is for Units 3, 4, and 5. So if you look here, we got the beginning of the United States there in 1776. All of Units 3, 4, and 5 all occur basically after 1763. So a much smaller time frame, but we're spending quite a bit more time on it because that's the beginning of the United States. We're operating under the government and the Constitution that we currently operate under now. And then you have over in Units 1 and the first half of Unit 2, we're really dealing with colonial America. So this is the part where it's easier to get mixed up, because what some professors do and what a lot of textbooks do is they just sort of go through century by century. They go chronologically, and that has advantages. But then within each century, they're covering every different region and every different theme. So it gets a little bit disjointed in that way. What I do is I divide the chapters up a little bit more thematically. We had chapter 1 where we went way back. Then we go into chapter 2 where we're really over in Europe and the Middle East and Asia and Africa. And that's really, with a time period that's kind of toward the end of the Middle Ages, a little bit further to the left here than what you see on this timeline. Then we talk about New Spain coming in at the end of the 15th century. And in that same chapter, in chapter 3, we also talk about New France up in the north, also a little bit in the Caribbean and South America, but mainly in the part that we now think of as Eastern Canada, and then the sort of Great Lakes, upper Midwest area. And toward the end of chapter 3, we cover that all the way up to the end of the French and Indian War. which is really kind of a prelude to the American Revolution. We have also chapter 4 on the Protestant Reformation, where we hop back to Europe and talk about the religious wars that went on there, but those ended up having a huge impact on American settlement. And then we have also the British colonies, which are probably the most important because those are the ones that were basically seeding the United States. We cover those a lot in chapters 5 and 6, not just the British colonies in Jamestown, Virginia, and then also in New England, but also there were Dutch and Swedish colonies that got soaked up into the British colonies by the time they later became the United States. And then there are also parts of New France, like the upper Midwest, that become part of the United States. And then much later, after Spain becomes Mexico in that part of New Spain, then the northern half of Mexico also becomes part of the United States in the 1840s. And then we also have a big chapter on philosophy and religion there that are kind of toward the end of the 18th century as well, and connecting over into Unit 2.